The 1930s in America were years unlike any other, a time when the very fabric of society seemed to fray under the weight of economic collapse and widespread despair. The Great Depression was not simply a period of high unemployment or empty bank accounts. It was a seismic upheaval that disrupted every aspect of daily life, leaving millions of people stripped of their livelihoods, their homes, and their sense of security. Entire families found themselves living in makeshift shacks, cardboard boxes, or even beneath the protective overhangs of abandoned buildings. Towns and cities that had once thrived with the hum of industry and commerce fell silent, and the once bustling streets seemed to echo the emptiness of lives in turmoil. Yet amidst this widespread devastation, a group of people emerged who embodied resilience and resourcefulness in ways that most could scarcely imagine. These were the hobos, the itinerant travelers who traversed the nation on the rails, relying on nothing but their wits, courage, and an unbreakable spirit to survive in a world that seemed determined to deny them even the most basic necessities. Hobos were often misunderstood by the wider public. To many, they appeared as aimless wanderers, drifters without purpose or ambition. Yet those who took the time to understand their lives discovered a complex subculture defined by rules, codes, and survival strategies honed over years of necessity. Unlike tramps who avoided work entirely, or bums who often relied on begging or charity, hobos actively sought ways to sustain themselves through labor, barter, and ingenuity. They were not idle, they were strategists of survival, constantly navigating a landscape of scarcity, danger, and uncertainty. Each hobo carried only the essentials in a bindle, a small bundle of possessions tied to a stick, often containing a few changes of clothing, a knife, a tin cup, perhaps a small journal, and sometimes a treasured photograph or keepsake from home. These bundles were more than mere storage. They were symbols of mobility and independence, allowing hobos to pick up and move at a moment's notice. The lives of hobos were defined by impermanence. They rarely stayed in one place for long, moving from town to town in search of work, food, and safety. The landscape of America during the Depression was both their challenge and their canvas. Train tracks snaked through every state, connecting towns and cities that varied wildly in their willingness to accommodate these travelers. The hobos learned to read these landscapes, discerning which communities would offer opportunities for work, which neighborhoods might provide a warm meal or a dry place to sleep, and which areas were fraught with hostility. Rail yards became central hubs of information and social connection. Here, hobos would exchange stories, share news of which towns had charitable organizations offering food, and pass along advice about which employers were trustworthy and which ones exploited transient workers. In these rail yards, the hobo culture truly came alive, a network of human resilience and intelligence operating just beneath the notice of mainstream society. Hobos also developed a sophisticated system of symbols, a secret language etched onto fences, posts, sidewalks, and even tree trunks. These symbols communicated vital information to fellow travelers. A simple mark could indicate that a homeowner was friendly, that dogs guarded a property, or that food was available nearby. These signs were a form of social intelligence, a way for a marginalized group to create order and safety in a world that often offered neither. The symbols themselves were varied, inventive, and endlessly practical. A cross could signify danger, a circle might indicate kindness, and arrows guided travelers toward opportunities or away from threats. This code was not merely a curiosity, it was a lifeline, a tangible manifestation of the collective knowledge of a community that existed on the margins, yet thrived through cooperation and ingenuity. To survive, hobos had to master a range of skills that went far beyond mere scavenging. They learned to travel efficiently and safely, often riding freight trains illegally, which carried the constant risk of injury or arrest. Many hobos recounted stories of dangerous encounters, narrowly avoiding being caught by railroad security or falling victim to treacherous terrain and mechanical accidents. Yet these risks were balanced by necessity. The trains offered the only practical means of covering the vast distances required to find work and sustenance. Beyond physical skill, hobos developed sharp social acumen. They knew how to negotiate temporary jobs, how to read the intentions of strangers, and how to foster alliances that could mean the difference between hunger and a full meal. Their survival was not just a matter of chance. It was the result of strategy, adaptability, and an acute understanding of human behavior. The economic landscape of the Great Depression dictated much of hobo life. With unemployment rates soaring above 25% at the height of the crisis, the availability of work was both scarce and unpredictable. Hobos often engaged in seasonal labor, moving to farms during harvest time, or taking on odd jobs in towns where labor demand temporarily increased. Wages were minimal, and payment was often in kind rather than cash: a loaf of bread, a bowl of stew, or a night's shelter in exchange for a day's labor. In this environment, hobo communities valued reputation and skill above money. A hobo known for reliability, honesty, or expertise in a trade could navigate this barter-based economy more successfully than one who relied on charm or luck alone. These reputations were hard, earned, and crucial for survival, reflecting the intricate social networks that hobos maintained even while constantly on the move. Life on the road required creativity in every aspect of daily existence. Hobos learned to find food not just through work, but through foraging, dumpster diving, and the kindness of strangers. They developed makeshift cooking methods, using portable stoves, open fires, or even discarded cans to prepare meals. Shelter was equally inventive, ranging from sleeping in abandoned buildings, barns, or under bridges to constructing rudimentary tents from tarps or cloth. Cleanliness and hygiene were challenging but not neglected. Hobos improvised methods for washing, often using rivers, streams, or public facilities. These daily practices of survival required both physical resilience and mental toughness, as the line between comfort and suffering was often razor thin. Despite these hardships, hobos found ways to maintain community and culture. Traveling together in small groups, they shared resources, advice, and companionship. Storytelling was central to their culture. Anecdotes of narrowly avoided danger, clever workarounds, or humorous encounters with authority were passed along rail lines, creating a shared identity and sense of belonging. Music, poetry, and art also played a role, providing not just entertainment, but a means of expressing the emotional landscape of life on the road. Many hobos kept journals or sketchbooks, documenting their journeys in ways that would later provide invaluable insight into this unique subculture. These records reveal a population deeply attuned to both the practicalities and the philosophies of survival, demonstrating a resilience that transcended mere physical endurance. The psychological dimension of hobo life cannot be overstated. Living without stability, with constant uncertainty, required an extraordinary level of mental fortitude. Hobos developed coping mechanisms to deal with isolation, rejection, and the constant presence of danger. Humor, storytelling, and camaraderie served as essential buffers against despair. The very act of traveling, of moving, seeking, and overcoming obstacles provided a sense of purpose and control in an era when so much of life was dictated by forces beyond individual influence. In a world stripped of possessions, security, and predictability, the hobo's sense of agency came from their ability to navigate challenges creatively and independently. Hobos were also keen observers of society. Their transient existence allowed them to see America in ways that most settled citizens never could. They witnessed the inequalities, injustices, and regional variations that defined the Depression era. They saw wealth and poverty side by side, generosity and cruelty intertwined, and the varied ways communities responded to crisis. This perspective informed their strategies for survival, as understanding human behavior and societal patterns often proved as crucial as finding food or shelter. Their experiences created a mental map of the country, one that combined geography, social networks, and cultural insights into a guide for survival that no formal education could provide. In essence, the hobos of the Great Depression exemplified a form of resilience that was both practical and philosophical. They survived not through luck or charity alone, but through a combination of skill, intelligence, adaptability, and communal support. They lived in a liminal space between society and wilderness, finding opportunities where others saw only desolation. Their existence challenges conventional ideas of wealth, success, and survival, demonstrating that human ingenuity and solidarity can flourish even in the most unforgiving circumstances. The story of hobos is more than a historical curiosity. It is a testament to the strength of the human spirit. In the face of economic collapse, social neglect, and physical hardship, these wanderers carved out lives defined by independence, cleverness, and resilience. They remind us that survival is not simply a matter of resources, but of creativity, courage, and the ability to navigate uncertainty with intelligence and compassion. The hobos of the Great Depression were more than mere travelers. They were symbols of adaptation, endurance, and the enduring human capacity to overcome adversity. For the hobos of the Great Depression, the railroad was not merely a mode of transportation. It was a lifeline, a moving artery that connected scattered towns, farms, and cities across the United States. To understand hobo life is to understand the critical role that trains played in their survival. The vastness of America, with its sprawling plains, mountains, and industrial hubs, made walking or any other form of travel impractical. The rails offered speed, reach, and opportunity, though at significant risk. Hobos were acutely aware that every train ride was a delicate balance of daring and caution, a mixture of freedom and danger, and mastering this world required ingenuity, courage, and constant vigilance. Hobos rode freight trains illegally, often hopping atop moving cars in the dead of night, guided only by the glimmer of stars or the dim light of a lantern. The trains themselves were dangerous. Misjudging a jump could result in crushed limbs, fatal falls, or collisions. Railroad police, known as bull handlers, patrolled yards with clubs and dogs, ready to eject trespassers. Yet the hobos learned to read the rhythm of the trains, to sense the gaps between cars, and to time their movements with precision. These skills were not innate. They were taught by experience, observation, and mentorship from older travelers. Many young hobos recalled watching a seasoned rider handle a moving train with such confidence that it seemed like a dance, the rhythm of wheels over tracks guiding every step. The rail yards themselves were complex ecosystems, bustling with activity yet laden with hidden risks. Freight cars carried coal, timber, steel, and agricultural products, each type presenting its own hazards. Hobos quickly learned which cars were safer to ride. and which were prone to sudden movement or precarious heights. They also learned the schedules, the patterns, and the routes, often memorizing the way trains moved across regions. A train heading west might offer work opportunities in farms or orchards. A northbound freight might carry the promise of seasonal labor in lumber mills. The ability to read the landscape of rail traffic was critical, as it determined both survival and opportunity. A misjudged choice could strand a hobo in a hostile town or leave them hungry in an isolated countryside. The social world of the railroads was equally crucial. Train yards were meeting points where hobos gathered to exchange news, resources, and advice. Experienced travelers taught newcomers the unwritten rules of hobo life, instructing them on everything from safely hopping trains to finding free meals or temporary work. Communication in these yards was often hushed but precise, a network of knowledge passed hand to hand. In many ways, rail yards were classrooms, training grounds, and marketplaces all at once. The bonds formed in these spaces could mean the difference between survival and disaster, as hobos shared intelligence on which towns offered kindness, which employers were reliable, and which areas were patrolled heavily by law enforcement. One of the most fascinating aspects of hobo rail life was the development of a secret language of symbols. Hobos marked fences, posts, sidewalks, and trees with cryptic signs that conveyed information critical for survival. A simple mark could communicate a wealth of knowledge, a safe place to sleep, a kind-hearted family willing to share food, the presence of aggressive dogs, or a warning to avoid a particular house or town. These symbols were part of a sophisticated code, understood only by those within the community. It was a communication network that spanned states, connecting strangers through a shared understanding of danger and opportunity. In essence, the railroads became a living map, annotated in invisible ink of survival, guiding hobos safely through a landscape fraught with uncertainty. Traveling on the rails also demanded psychological resilience. Hobos were constantly navigating fear, from the threat of falling off a moving train to the unpredictability of strangers in towns. Many spoke of the anxiety of nights spent in freight yards, listening to the echo of approaching locomotives and the distant calls of security personnel. Yet, alongside fear was a sense of exhilaration, a liberation born from mobility. Being on the train meant freedom from the static despair of towns devastated by unemployment and poverty. It meant the possibility of reaching a place where work, food, and shelter awaited, even if only temporarily. The train was both a symbol and a vehicle of survival, embodying the hope that life, though precarious, could continue to move forward. The routes themselves were diverse, and the experience of each region shaped hobo survival strategies. In the industrial North, hobos might find work in factories or lumber mills, taking on physically demanding labor in exchange for meals or temporary housing. In the South, agricultural opportunities dominated, with labor-intensive tasks like cotton picking, tobacco harvesting, or fruit gathering offering sustenance in exchange for skill and endurance. Each area required different knowledge, and successful hobos learned to adapt quickly, observing local customs, bargaining practices, and work rhythms. Mobility was not just about physical movement. It was about the ability to integrate into the social and economic fabric of each place temporarily, extracting sustenance while leaving no permanent footprint. Hobos also became experts at reading the environment for hidden opportunities. Abandoned buildings, barns, and sheds provided shelter from the elements. Stream and riverbeds offered water, and occasionally edible plants or fish. Hobos understood the importance of camouflage, choosing sleeping spots that offered protection from both weather and human detection. They often traveled in small groups for safety, sharing both knowledge and resources. In these small traveling communities, mutual trust was essential. A single mistake, trusting the wrong person or misjudging the stability of a train car, could result in serious injury or death. Yet, despite the dangers, the camaraderie among hobos created a sense of belonging and identity, a shared resilience that mitigated the harshness of life on the rails. The hobo lifestyle was also marked by ingenuity in dealing with scarcity. Meals were often improvised from what could be scavenged or earned through odd jobs. Hobos learned to cook with minimal tools, using discarded cans, portable stoves, or open fires. Knowledge of edible plants, fishing, and foraging was crucial, especially in rural areas where access to purchased food was limited. Every resource had to be maximized, nothing could be wasted. This economy of survival was both a practical necessity and a manifestation of skill and intelligence. The ability to transform limited resources into sustenance was a daily triumph for those living on the rails. Another crucial aspect of hobo rail travel was timing. The decision of when to hop a train, when to disembark, and when to seek shelter required constant vigilance and judgment. Seasonality played a major role, as harsh winters could make trains and rural travel perilous. Hobos learned to interpret weather patterns, anticipate snowstorms, and adapt their routes accordingly. They also had to navigate human threats, from law enforcement to hostile locals who viewed transient travelers as undesirable. The ability to assess risk and make split-second decisions was a hallmark of successful hobos, reflecting a keen intelligence that went far beyond mere physical daring. Railroads were also a platform for entrepreneurship of sorts. Some hobos discovered ways to earn small sums through minor trades along the tracks, whether by selling handmade items, performing small tasks for train workers, or trading information. Knowledge of schedules, routes, and local opportunities became a form of currency, as experienced hobos could guide newcomers for food or lodging. The network of information along the rails was intricate and vital, representing an informal economy based on knowledge, trust, and reciprocity. In this sense, the railroad was not just a mode of travel. It was a dynamic environment that required strategic thinking, adaptability, and social intelligence. Despite the danger and unpredictability, the rails also provided moments of beauty and freedom. Hobos often spoke of the breathtaking landscapes viewed from the tops of freight cars, the vast skies of the plains, the mountains rising in the distance, and the quiet majesty of rivers and forests at dawn. These moments offered psychological respite, a reminder that life, though hard, still held wonder. Traveling on the rails created a rhythm of life distinct from the stasis of towns ravaged by economic collapse. Every mile covered was both survival and adventure, a step toward sustenance and a glimpse of freedom in an era defined by scarcity. The cultural aspects of rail life were equally important. Hobos developed songs, stories, and folklore that reflected their experiences. Music was often passed from traveler to traveler, providing comfort and entertainment during long journeys. Anecdotes about clever tricks, narrowly avoided danger, or acts of kindness became part of the oral history of the hobo community. These narratives strengthened social bonds, transmitted practical knowledge, and preserved a sense of identity amid the anonymity of constant movement. The rails, therefore, were not only pathways for physical survival, but also arteries of culture and storytelling, sustaining the spirit of those who traversed them. The secret symbols, the survival strategies, the communal bonds, and the sheer ingenuity required to navigate the railroads illustrate just how sophisticated the hobo way of life was. It was a culture built entirely on adaptability, observation, and the clever use of limited resources. For hobos, success was not measured in money, possessions, or societal approval. it was measured in the ability to move safely, find sustenance, and maintain health and spirit in a world that offered none of these guarantees. They existed in a delicate balance with society, exploiting opportunities while avoiding the dangers imposed by legal authorities, hostile locals, and the elements themselves. Ultimately, the story of hobos on the rails is a story of human ingenuity in the face of extreme adversity. The trains were more than a means of transportation. They were lifelines, classrooms, marketplaces, and stages for a culture that thrived on risk, intelligence, and cooperation. The rails connected a nation of despair and provided a network for survival, allowing individuals without money or property to navigate the Great Depression with skill, courage, and resilience. Each train car carried not only the cargo of the nation, but also the hopes, fears, and determination of those who dared to ride it, forging a legacy of resourcefulness and freedom that remains remarkable to this day. Despite the harsh realities of the Great Depression and the constant uncertainties of life on the road, hobos proved to be masters of survival through work, barter, and ingenuity. Unlike tramps who avoided labor or bums who relied primarily on charity, hobos sought out opportunities to sustain themselves, often transforming menial or physically demanding labor into a lifeline. Their approach to work was pragmatic and adaptive. They understood that cash was often scarce, that money might not be immediately forthcoming, and that survival required both flexibility and creativity. Each job, each exchange, and each encounter became a calculated step in a larger strategy to secure food, shelter, and safety. The types of work hobos engaged in varied widely, depending on the region, season, and personal skill set. In agricultural areas, hobos often found employment in the fields. Cotton picking, fruit harvesting, tobacco work, and other labor-intensive tasks were common. These jobs were grueling and poorly compensated, but they provided not only food, but also a sense of structure and purpose. Many farmers, struggling themselves during the Depression, were willing to accept hobo labor in exchange for food, temporary shelter, or small payments. Hobos quickly learned to assess which farms or orchards would offer fair treatment, which would attempt to exploit them, and which were too dangerous to approach. Observation, intuition, and word-of-mouth intelligence from fellow travelers became critical tools in identifying suitable work. In industrial towns, hobos often turned their hands to factory work, lumber mills, and railroad maintenance, loading and unloading freight, repairing tracks, and assisting in warehouses provided opportunities to exchange labor for meals or modest pay. Yet even these tasks were fraught with risk. Industrial work could be dangerous, especially for transient workers unfamiliar with machinery or local procedures. Injuries were common, and with no social safety net, a serious accident could mean permanent disability or death. Hobos, however, developed a remarkable ability to learn quickly, adapt to new work environments, and negotiate their value. Reputation mattered enormously. A hobo known for skill, reliability, and honesty could find steady work and goodwill, whereas one perceived as lazy or untrustworthy was often shunned or mistreated. Bartering became a cornerstone of hobo survival. Money was often in short supply, but skill, knowledge, and effort could be exchanged for essential resources. A carpenter might repair furniture for a meal. A handyman could mend fences in exchange for shelter, or a washer of laundry could receive a loaf of bread. This informal economy required both ingenuity and diplomacy, as successful barter depended on understanding the needs of others and demonstrating value quickly. Hobos learned to assess the potential benefits of any interaction, weighing the effort required against the likelihood of receiving sustenance or protection. Over time, this skill became second nature, allowing even the most destitute traveler to navigate the world with minimal cash. Work was not always consistent or guaranteed. Many hobos had to rely on temporary labor, hopping from one opportunity to the next, often without warning or preparation. Flexibility was key. Some travelers specialized in particular trades, carrying knowledge that allowed them to perform tasks in multiple towns. Others relied on general labor skills, willing to take on anything from chopping wood to mending fences to shoveling coal. The adaptability of hobos was a form of intelligence, demonstrating an understanding of supply, demand, and timing in local economies. Work was rarely glamorous, but it was the currency of survival, and those who mastered it were often the most successful on the road. Hobos also developed strategies to maximize the value of their labor. In some towns, they would work a few days in one location, receiving food or shelter in exchange, then move on before the community grew weary of their presence. This transient approach allowed them to stretch their survival resources across multiple areas, always seeking the next opportunity before current resources ran dry. Timing, networking, and reputation were all critical components of this strategy. Experienced hobos often taught younger travelers these lessons, emphasizing the importance of discretion, negotiation, and social intelligence in securing sustenance. Another critical survival tactic was specialization. Certain hobos developed expertise in particular trades or tasks, increasing their value to those who could provide food or shelter. Skilled carpenters, blacksmiths, or mechanics found work more easily than general laborers, as their skills were in demand and could not be easily replaced. Similarly, some hobos possessed talents in performance, music, or storytelling, entertaining communities in exchange for meals or lodging. These skills were not only practical, but also offered psychological comfort, creating a sense of purpose and identity amidst the instability of transient life. Food procurement was intimately tied to work and barter. Hobos rarely relied solely on charity. Instead, they sought to earn or trade for their meals. Farms, rail yards, and industrial sites often provided scraps, leftovers, or tasks that could be converted into food. Hobos learned to be resourceful in preparation and conservation, cooking over open fires, using improvised tools, and rationing carefully. Knowledge of seasonal availability of crops, local customs regarding food sharing, and even foraging in nearby forests or riverbanks could mean the difference between hunger and sustenance. Survival was a daily negotiation, balancing labor, opportunity, and careful management of limited resources. Hobos also formed temporary networks of cooperation, creating a system in which labor and resources could be pooled or exchanged. Traveling in small groups allowed for specialization within the group, shared knowledge of local opportunities, and mutual protection. One hobo might excel at carpentry, while another knew where to find food, and together they could support each other more effectively than they could alone. These networks extended across regions, creating informal connections that allowed travelers to benefit from the experiences and advice of those who had been to towns before them. In essence, hobos created a self-sustaining microeconomy based on reciprocity, skill, and trust. Even when work was scarce, hobos displayed remarkable ingenuity. They would find creative ways to convert small efforts into tangible benefits. A discarded object could become a useful tool. A simple act of kindness could be traded for future favors. A skill learned in one town could be applied in another. The ability to improvise, to see potential where others saw none, was a hallmark of successful hobo life. Resourcefulness was not simply a survival strategy, It was a mindset, a way of interpreting the world that allowed individuals to thrive even under extreme scarcity. Beyond the practicalities of labor and barter, hobos cultivated knowledge of social dynamics. Understanding human behavior was as critical as physical skill. Hobos learned to negotiate with employers, persuade strangers to provide assistance, and navigate the hierarchies of small towns. Social intelligence allowed them to avoid exploitation, recognize danger, and maximize opportunities for sustenance. This keen understanding of people, combined with practical skills, formed the foundation of hobo survival. It was not brute strength or luck that ensured success on the road, but rather a combination of observation, adaptability, and strategic thinking. The concept of reputation played a central role in this social economy. A hobo known for reliability, honesty, and competence could secure work, food, and shelter more easily than one with a questionable record. Conversely, those who were perceived as lazy, dishonest, or troublesome often found themselves shunned, denied assistance, or even threatened. Reputation was built through consistent behavior, the quality of work, and the ability to maintain social bonds. It was a form of social currency, sometimes more valuable than money itself, as it opened doors to opportunities that would otherwise remain inaccessible. Hobos also navigated the complex relationship between work and legality. Trespassing, unauthorized rail travel, and unlicensed labor were common, but hobos had to avoid excessive attention from authorities. Balancing the need to earn sustenance with the need to avoid arrest required judgment, experience, and caution. Many learned to read local law enforcement patterns, adjust travel routes accordingly, and minimize confrontation. In this way, survival was as much about strategy and foresight as it was about physical capability or labor skill. Barter extended beyond labor and food to other forms of mutual aid. Hobos would exchange knowledge, provide warnings of dangerous areas, and share tools or equipment. A hobo who understood how to repair a piece of farm machinery might assist another in exchange for advice on finding work. These exchanges were often informal but essential, creating a network of cooperation that helped individuals navigate a world in which formal systems of support had collapsed. Mutual aid became a cornerstone of hobo culture, reinforcing the idea that survival was not purely individual but often collective. Hobos also learned to adapt to seasonal challenges. Work availability shifted with the seasons, as farms required more hands during harvest and industrial sites fluctuated with production cycles. Travel strategies were adjusted accordingly, with northern regions attracting workers in the summer and southern regions providing opportunities in winter. This seasonal mobility required foresight, planning, and knowledge of regional economies. Hobos who mastered these patterns could sustain themselves more effectively, moving where opportunities were greatest while avoiding scarcity or danger. The ability to combine labor, barter, and resourcefulness allowed hobos to survive without money, but it also fostered a sense of independence and pride. Each day on the road required decision, making, negotiation, and physical effort. Hobos were not passive victims of circumstance. They actively shaped their survival, leveraging skills, networks, and intelligence to navigate an uncertain world. This autonomy, even amidst deprivation, was a defining characteristic of hobo life. Survival was not simply about endurance. It was about agency, creativity, and the ability to adapt. Ultimately, the work and barter strategies of hobos reveal a culture of practical intelligence, social acumen, and resilience. By combining labor, skill, and ingenuity, hobos transformed scarcity into opportunity, creating a way of life that allowed them to endure one of the most challenging periods in American history. Their experiences demonstrate that survival is not solely dependent on wealth or material resources, but on adaptability, cooperation, and the intelligent application of human skill. The story of hobos during the Great Depression is a testament to human resourcefulness, illustrating that even in the face of extreme adversity, people can find ways to sustain themselves, support one another, and retain dignity. Survival on the road required hobos to cultivate a wide array of practical skills, and daily life demanded both ingenuity and adaptability. For those living without a permanent home, every action, finding shelter, sourcing food, maintaining health, and navigating danger, was a calculated effort that required both experience and creativity. Hobos had to manage not only the physical challenges of life on the move, but also the psychological pressures of uncertainty, isolation, and constant risk. Each day was a negotiation between necessity and opportunity, between scarcity and resourcefulness, and between vulnerability and resilience. Shelter was a fundamental concern for anyone on the road, and hobos had to improvise constantly. Abandoned buildings, barns, sheds, and even hollowed-out railway cars became temporary homes. Some found protection under bridges, in tunnels, or beneath the eaves of factories and warehouses. In rural areas, empty farmhouses or unused barns offered both warmth and safety. Improvisation was critical. Old tarps, worn blankets, and even discarded cardboard were transformed into makeshift tents or bedding. Hobos learned quickly which types of shelter provided the best protection from the elements and which were likely to attract attention from authorities or hostile locals. In addition, they had to remain mobile, understanding that a shelter that was safe today might become dangerous tomorrow. The ability to find, adapt, and abandon shelter efficiently was a skill honed through experience and observation. Food acquisition was another cornerstone of survival. Hobos relied on a combination of labor, barter, foraging, and improvisation to secure meals. Farms, orchards, and small town businesses often provided scraps or opportunities for work in exchange for food. Hobos became adept at identifying edible plants, fishing in rivers, or hunting small game when necessary. Many developed techniques for cooking with minimal equipment, using discarded cans, portable stoves, or open fires. Knowledge of local resources was invaluable. Rivers, streams, and forests were not only sources of food and water, but also offered privacy and safety for preparation. Hobos also learned to preserve food whenever possible, drying or storing perishable items to extend their usefulness on long journeys. Resource management extended beyond food and shelter. Hobos carefully conserved clothing, tools, and other essential items. Clothing was repaired repeatedly, often using ingenuity and improvisation when thread or needles were unavailable. Tools and utensils were scavenged, bartered, or repurposed to meet daily needs. Hobos understood that every possession had to serve multiple functions. A single knife might be used for cooking, defense, and crafting. Attention to detail in managing resources often meant the difference between comfort and suffering, and experienced hobos taught newcomers the importance of planning, improvisation, and foresight. Hygiene and health were constant concerns. Without regular access to bathrooms, laundry facilities, or medical care, hobos relied on rivers, streams, and public wash areas to maintain cleanliness. Illnesses, infections, and injuries were common threats, and treating them required both skill and resourcefulness. Many hobos learned basic first aid, herbal remedies, and improvised treatments for minor injuries. Knowledge of the natural environment and observation of symptoms played critical roles in survival. The physical demands of travel, combined with exposure to harsh weather, poor nutrition, and fatigue, made resilience essential. Hobos had to maintain strength and health as best they could, understanding that a single accident or illness could jeopardize their ability to continue traveling. Community played a crucial role in daily life, even for those constantly on the move. Hobos often traveled in small groups, sharing knowledge, resources, and protection. Within these groups, individuals developed roles based on skill and experience. Some excelled at finding work, others at securing food, while others were particularly adept at navigating trains or avoiding danger. Mutual assistance was vital, as no one could survive entirely alone in the challenging and unpredictable environment of the Great Depression. Beyond immediate survival, these connections provided emotional support, camaraderie, and a sense of identity. Stories, songs, and oral traditions passed among hobos reinforced bonds, transmitted practical knowledge, and created a shared culture that transcended geographic boundaries. Travel required both strategy and intuition. Hobos had to navigate a constantly shifting landscape of opportunity and danger. They learned to read signs of social hostility, to anticipate weather conditions, and to recognize towns where work and sustenance were likely. Decision-making was continuous, whether to move on from a town, which path to take to avoid law enforcement, when to approach a potential employer, and when to risk riding a train. The ability to assess risk, make quick decisions, and adapt to unforeseen circumstances was a hallmark of successful hobos. Over time, they developed an almost instinctual understanding of these dynamics, blending observation, experience, and intuition to survive. The psychological demands of life on the road were immense. Hobos faced isolation, uncertainty, and social stigma daily. Coping mechanisms varied but often included humor, storytelling, music, and camaraderie. Many hobos kept journals or notebooks, documenting experiences, practical tips, and reflections on life. This practice not only preserved knowledge for others, but also provided a mental framework for processing the challenges of constant mobility. Storytelling, in particular, was both educational and therapeutic, reinforcing lessons of survival and fostering a sense of continuity and connection among travelers. Risk management was an essential aspect of daily life. Hobos faced threats from trains, law enforcement, hostile locals, and environmental hazards. Understanding these risks required both knowledge and vigilance. Train hopping, while a primary mode of transportation, was inherently dangerous. Missteps could lead to severe injury or death. Law enforcement in towns and along rail lines often treated hobos harshly, making discretion and caution essential. Environmental hazards, from harsh winter storms to summer heat waves, demanded careful planning and adaptation. Successful hobos balanced boldness with prudence, learning to take calculated risks that maximized survival while minimizing exposure to danger. Education was another form of survival. Hobos learned not only from experience, but also from one another. Newcomers often relied on veterans to teach them the skills necessary to navigate rail yards, find work, procure food, and avoid hazards. Knowledge was shared generously within the community, recognizing that the success of one individual could enhance the safety and efficiency of the group. This informal education system ensured the continuity of survival strategies, allowing successive waves of travelers to benefit from the accumulated wisdom of those who had preceded them. The ingenuity of hobos extended to transportation beyond the rails. While trains were the primary means of travel, many hobos used other methods when necessary, walking long distances, hitchhiking, or using bicycles and wagons. Each mode required different strategies and presented unique challenges. Walking long distances demanded stamina and careful route planning, while hitchhiking required social skill and the ability to assess risk. Hobos adapted to circumstances with remarkable flexibility, demonstrating that survival relied not only on courage and resourcefulness, but also on versatility and adaptability. In addition to practical skills, hobos developed cultural practices that reinforced community and resilience. Songs, chants, and poetry were common, reflecting experiences on the road, humor, hardships, and aspirations. These cultural expressions served multiple purposes. They entertained, transmitted knowledge, reinforced norms, and strengthened bonds within the community. Even in dire circumstances, hobos maintained a sense of identity and creativity, using culture as both a survival tool and a source of emotional sustenance. Bartering extended beyond food and labor into more nuanced forms of exchange. Knowledge, advice, and introductions were often traded among hobos. A veteran traveler might share insights about a town's resources in exchange for assistance with a task or a promise of future reciprocity. Tools, clothing, and small possessions were similarly exchanged to maximize utility and efficiency. This complex system of informal barter created a network of interdependence, demonstrating that survival relied as much on social intelligence as on physical skill. Seasonal adaptation was critical to managing survival. In winter, cold temperatures and snow increased the dangers of travel, forcing hobos to find more secure shelter, ration food carefully, and adjust travel schedules. Summer brought its own challenges, including heat exhaustion, scarcity of water, and unpredictable storms. Hobos became adept at reading environmental cues, anticipating seasonal changes, and modifying strategies accordingly. Seasonal awareness enhanced the ability to secure work, as agricultural and industrial labor cycles varied throughout the year. Those who mastered these rhythms could optimize opportunities for survival and mobility. Daily routines, though improvised, followed patterns that maximized efficiency. Hobos often woke early to search for work or to move along rail lines before security became active. Meals were prepared when and where resources allowed, and tasks such as washing clothes, repairing tools, or maintaining shelter were incorporated into the day's rhythm. Time management was essential. Wasted hours could mean missed opportunities for food, work, or safe travel. The discipline required to maintain such routines, even under extreme uncertainty, reflected the practical intelligence of hobo communities and their ability to impose structure on a chaotic environment. Hobos also displayed remarkable ingenuity in self-defense and safety, knowing that theft, assault, and other dangers were constant threats. Many travelers carried simple weapons such as knives or improvised alarms and signals. Observation, stealth, and situational awareness were as important as any physical defense, allowing hobos to anticipate threats and respond effectively. Safety strategies were shared among travelers, reinforcing collective security and enhancing the survival prospects of all members of a community. In addition to practical survival, hobos cultivated mental and emotional resilience. Life on the road was unpredictable, often lonely, and physically exhausting, yet hobos maintained hope and creativity. Storytelling, humor, camaraderie, and small personal rituals provided psychological sustenance, helping individuals cope with fear, loss, and uncertainty. Emotional resilience was as critical as practical skill. Without it, the constant challenges of travel could overwhelm even the most capable individual. Hobos demonstrated that mental fortitude, optimism, and adaptability were essential components of survival in extreme conditions. The interconnectedness of practical skill, social networks, and psychological resilience created a sophisticated system of survival. Hobos were not merely wandering individuals, they were participants in a complex culture of mobility, knowledge exchange, and cooperation. They navigated dangers, secured sustenance, and maintained dignity through ingenuity, discipline, and solidarity. This multifaceted approach allowed them to endure conditions that would have been insurmountable for the unprepared. Their strategies reflected a deep understanding of the environment, human behavior, and the dynamics of scarcity and opportunity. Ultimately, the daily life of a hobo was a testament to human adaptability. Shelter, food, health, mobility, work, barter, and emotional well-being were interwoven into a delicate balance of skill, strategy, and creativity. Each day presented new challenges, yet hobos persisted, learning from experience from one another and from the environment itself. Survival was a continuous exercise in problem solving, resource management, and community engagement. It required intelligence, resilience, and the courage to face uncertainty head-on. The experiences of hobos during the Great Depression illustrate that survival is not merely a function of resources, but of ingenuity, adaptability, and social intelligence. They transformed scarcity into opportunity, created networks of support, and maintained psychological and cultural resilience despite constant adversity. Their lives challenge conventional notions of poverty and homelessness, revealing a sophisticated approach to survival that combined skill, strategy, and humanity. In the harsh landscape of the Great Depression, hobos exemplified the extraordinary capacity of human beings to endure, adapt, and thrive through ingenuity, cooperation, and courage. The life of a hobo during the Great Depression was defined not only by survival, but by a profound sense of freedom, a unique kind of independence that set them apart from the rest of society. In an era when millions of Americans were confined by poverty, unemployment, and social constraints, hobos moved with remarkable autonomy, relying on their own skills, judgment, and resourcefulness. This freedom, however, was not without cost. It demanded courage, adaptability, and an intimate understanding of the precarious balance between risk and reward. For hobos, life on the rails represented both necessity and choice, a deliberate embrace of mobility, self-reliance, and a rejection of conventional expectations. The physical aspect of freedom for hobos was striking. Unlike those trapped by foreclosures, evictions, or joblessness in a fixed location, hobos were constantly on the move. The open landscape of the United States became their domain, and the trains their highways. The mountains, rivers, plains, and towns were no longer obstacles, but routes of opportunity. Each new town offered the possibility of work, food, or companionship. Each new railway line was a chance to escape danger or scarcity. This mobility allowed hobos to maintain agency in an era when many had none, giving them control over their immediate environment. Even if they could not control the broader economic collapse, the psychological dimension of this freedom was equally significant. Hobos were not beholden to traditional schedules, employers, or landlords. They made their own decisions about when to travel, when to work, and where to rest. Every day presented choices, and each choice carried consequences. This autonomy fostered a sense of responsibility, independence, and self-reliance. Hobos learned to trust their judgment, to make rapid decisions under pressure, and to rely on their skills and instincts to navigate an unpredictable world. The very act of surviving on one's own terms became a form of personal empowerment, a statement of resilience against a society that had largely abandoned them. The social freedom hobos experienced was also remarkable. Traveling along the railroads, they encountered a wide range of people, fellow hobos, townsfolk, farmers, laborers, and sometimes wealthy benefactors. They developed the ability to navigate social interactions fluidly, determining whom to trust, whom to avoid, and when to assert themselves or remain inconspicuous. Hobos were adept at reading human behavior, interpreting subtle cues, and negotiating relationships that could yield food, shelter, or information. This social intelligence was crucial to their survival, allowing them to maintain autonomy while benefiting from cooperation and community. Despite the freedom and independence, hobos lived lives of constant uncertainty. Trains could be delayed or rerouted, jobs might vanish overnight, towns might become hostile. Each decision carried risk. A misjudged route could result in hunger, exposure, or arrest. A miscalculated interaction could lead to conflict or danger. Yet within these challenges lay the essence of the hobo experience, the deliberate choice to embrace a life of calculated risk and constant adaptation. The freedom they enjoyed was inseparable from the courage required to maintain it, and every successful journey reinforced their resilience and confidence. The culture of freedom among hobos was also expressed through creativity and innovation. Traveling long distances required imaginative solutions to practical problems, from makeshift shelter and portable cooking methods to navigation, safety strategies, and social negotiation. Hobos constantly devised new ways to survive with limited resources, demonstrating ingenuity that was as much intellectual as it was practical. This creativity extended to personal expression as well. Storytelling, music, art, and journaling provided outlets for reflection, identity, and emotional release. In essence, hobos were not just surviving, they were actively shaping a lifestyle that celebrated autonomy, skill, and adaptability. Community was a vital complement to this freedom. While independence was a core value, hobos understood that survival often depended on cooperation. Traveling in small groups, sharing information about work, shelter, and food, and exchanging knowledge of safe routes or sympathetic towns created networks of mutual support. These networks allowed hobos to maintain autonomy while benefiting from collective wisdom. The bonds formed in these temporary communities were both practical and emotional, providing reassurance, guidance, and companionship in an otherwise uncertain and transient life. Freedom also manifested in the ability to choose one's moral and ethical boundaries. Hobos operated outside the mainstream economic and social systems, which required them to develop personal codes of conduct. While some resorted to theft or deception, many hobos adhered to principles of honesty, fairness, and mutual aid within their community. Reputation was critical. A hobo known for integrity could find food, shelter, and opportunities more easily than one whose behavior was questionable. In this way, freedom was intertwined with responsibility. Hobos exercised autonomy while navigating the ethical and social dimensions of survival. The spiritual dimension of freedom was subtle but significant. Many hobos spoke of a sense of connection to the open road, the natural landscape, and the rhythms of life along the rails. The act of moving, observing, and adapting became meditative, fostering reflection and resilience. The uncertainty and risk inherent in their lifestyle required acceptance of circumstances beyond their control, cultivating patience, mindfulness, and self-reliance. In a time of societal collapse, the road became both a refuge and a teacher, providing lessons in humility, endurance, and the value of personal freedom. The economic freedom of hobos was equally notable. Lacking money, property, or traditional employment, they created alternative systems of exchange, leveraging skills, labor, and knowledge to meet their needs. Bartering became a sophisticated tool. A day of labor might yield food or shelter. Expertise in carpentry, mechanics, or performance could secure essential resources. This informal economy allowed hobos to operate outside conventional financial constraints, exercising autonomy over their survival strategies. Economic freedom, however, was inseparable from adaptability. Success depended on skill, negotiation, and the ability to anticipate and respond to changing circumstances. Travel itself was an expression of freedom. Hobos chose their routes, destinations, and timing, guided by a combination of opportunity, intuition, and social intelligence. Each journey required careful planning, risk assessment, and improvisation, yet it also provided a sense of control and agency that many Americans lacked during the Great Depression. The very act of moving, hopping trains, and navigating unfamiliar terrain embodied a philosophy of independence, emphasizing mobility, adaptability, and self-determination as core values of hobo life. Freedom also carried psychological weight. The absence of fixed schedules, permanent employers, or landlords allowed hobos to structure their lives according to personal priorities, but it also demanded resilience in the face of uncertainty. Hunger, exposure, illness, and legal threats were constant companions. Mental toughness, optimism, and problem-solving were essential, transforming the experience of risk into a form of empowerment. Hobos learned to thrive under pressure, maintaining hope and agency in situations that might have paralyzed less adaptable individuals. Cultural freedom was expressed through creativity, storytelling, and music. Hobos created songs and poems about life on the rails, dangers encountered, and moments of triumph or humor. These cultural expressions were more than entertainment. They were a means of preserving knowledge, reinforcing community bonds, and asserting identity. Creativity became a survival tool, providing both emotional resilience and practical instruction. Even amid scarcity, hobos cultivated imagination, humor, and reflection, demonstrating that freedom encompasses not only physical autonomy, but also the capacity to shape one's mental and emotional world. The freedom of movement allowed hobos to observe and interact with a wide spectrum of society. Traveling across states and regions, they encountered diverse communities, labor markets, and social conditions. This exposure provided insight into human behavior, economic patterns, and social dynamics, which hobos used to make strategic decisions about where to work, sleep, and travel. Knowledge became currency, and the ability to adapt to varying social environments was a hallmark of successful travelers. Freedom, in this context, was inseparable from intelligence and perception. The road demanded both physical mobility and cognitive agility. Hobos also cultivated resilience through rituals and routines. Daily practices such as maintaining shelter, preparing food, observing local conditions, and managing personal hygiene provided structure and a sense of control. These routines reinforced independence while creating consistency in an otherwise unpredictable life. Freedom was not the absence of discipline. Rather, it was the ability to structure one's own life according to personal knowledge, skill, and judgment, maximizing safety and opportunity while minimizing dependence on external authority. The philosophy of freedom extended to identity and self-expression. Hobos often adopted nicknames, distinct clothing styles, or personal symbols that communicated individuality while signaling affiliation with the broader hobo community. These markers reinforced autonomy, allowing individuals to assert personality, reputation, and skill while navigating a transient and often anonymous existence. Identity, in this sense, became both a protective mechanism and a form of empowerment, allowing hobos to navigate societal boundaries on their own terms. Risk-taking was integral to freedom. Hobos understood that autonomy came with danger, whether from trains, law enforcement, hostile towns, or environmental hazards. Successful hobos learned to balance audacity with caution, taking calculated risks that expanded opportunity while minimizing threat. This constant negotiation between boldness and prudence defined their approach to freedom, demonstrating that autonomy is inseparable from awareness, intelligence, and strategy. The interplay of freedom, community, and survival shaped the ethical framework of hobo life. Cooperation, mutual aid, and adherence to informal codes of conduct allowed individuals to maintain autonomy while benefiting from collective knowledge. Social intelligence, integrity, and trust were as vital as physical skill, reinforcing the notion that freedom is not merely the absence of constraint, but the capacity to navigate complex social and environmental realities effectively. Hobo's freedom was also a statement of defiance against societal norms. In a period when economic collapse confined many to despair, hobos carved out lives on their own terms, rejecting dependency and asserting self-reliance. They created alternative economies, social networks, and survival strategies that allowed them to thrive outside conventional structures. This autonomy was a powerful form of resistance, demonstrating human resilience and ingenuity in the face of widespread adversity. The spiritual dimension of freedom was expressed in connection to the natural and human environment. The road became a teacher, guiding travelers in observation, adaptation, and endurance. Rivers, forests, plains, and urban landscapes offered lessons in survival and perspective. Interactions with other travelers, locals, and employers reinforced social awareness and empathy. Freedom, in this context, was holistic, physical, social, economic, emotional, and spiritual, encompassing the full spectrum of human experience. Ultimately, the spirit of freedom among hobos exemplified courage, resilience, and ingenuity. Life on the rails required constant adaptation, skillful negotiation, and psychological fortitude. Hobos exercised autonomy in the face of extreme adversity, transforming scarcity into opportunity and danger into empowerment. They demonstrated that true freedom is not simply the absence of constraint, but the ability to navigate risk, cultivate community, and assert agency in a complex and unpredictable world. Their lives remain a testament to the enduring human capacity for independence, creativity, and resilience, even in the most challenging circumstances. The legacy of hobos during the Great Depression is as much about their resilience and adaptability as it is about their ability to survive without money. Life on the road demanded a continuous negotiation with uncertainty, danger, and scarcity. Yet hobos transformed these challenges into opportunities for survival, learning, and self-expression. Their existence was a testament to human ingenuity, demonstrating that resourcefulness, courage, and social intelligence could compensate for the absence of traditional economic and social support systems. The lessons embedded in their experiences resonate far beyond the historical moment, offering insight into adaptability, creativity, and the human capacity to endure. As the Great Depression deepened, hobos became increasingly reliant on their ability to read the world around them. Observation was not a passive act, but a constant process of information gathering, analysis, and application. From the subtle behavior of farm animals to the rhythms of train schedules, every detail had potential significance. Hobos watched how employers treated workers, how townspeople reacted to strangers, and how natural landscapes changed with the seasons. This constant vigilance allowed them to anticipate danger, locate opportunities, and make decisions that maximized survival. Observation, in essence, became a form of intelligence and a core survival skill. The ability to anticipate and adapt to seasonal changes was crucial. In winter, freezing temperatures, snow, and ice could render travel dangerous and limit access to food and work. Hobos learned to identify natural shelters, stockpile supplies, and time their movements to coincide with the availability of labor or resources. Summer brought challenges of heat, dehydration, and scarcity of water, requiring different strategies for mobility, hydration, and shelter. Those who mastered seasonal patterns were more likely to thrive, moving strategically to exploit labor cycles, harvest periods, and environmental conditions. Adaptability became a defining characteristic of hobo survival, reflecting a sophisticated understanding of both human and natural systems. Hobos also exhibited remarkable skill in resource management. Every item they carried, clothing, tools, food, or blankets, served multiple purposes. Worn clothing was repaired repeatedly, sometimes with improvised materials, demonstrating creativity and attention to detail. Tools were scavenged, bartered, or repurposed to meet practical needs, whether for cooking, shelter, or defense. Even small possessions could be leveraged for survival, traded for meals, work, or information. This careful management of resources reflected both practical intelligence and foresight, allowing hobos to extend the utility of limited possessions and reduce vulnerability in unpredictable conditions. Food procurement was a central focus of daily life. Hobos relied on a combination of earned labor, bartering, foraging, and opportunistic scavenging. Farms, orchards, and small towns provided chances for work in exchange for meals, while rivers, forests, and abandoned areas offered natural resources. Hobos developed techniques for cooking with minimal equipment, using discarded cans, open fires, or improvised stoves. Knowledge of edible plants, fishing, and small game hunting was essential, as was the ability to ration and preserve food when possible. Meals were rarely luxurious, but they were sufficient to sustain life, demonstrating that resourcefulness and knowledge could overcome scarcity. Shelter was equally critical and required both ingenuity and adaptability. Hobos transformed abandoned buildings, barns, sheds, and other structures into temporary homes. Bridges, tunnels, and railway cars also provided refuge. Improvisation was key. Tarps, blankets, and cardboard were used creatively to provide warmth and protection from the elements. Location was crucial. Shelters had to be safe from weather, wildlife, and human detection, yet accessible to resources such as water, food, or work. This delicate balance between safety and practicality was mastered through experience, observation, and shared knowledge within hobo communities. Social intelligence was another cornerstone of survival. Hobos constantly assessed whom to trust, when to engage, and how to negotiate interactions. The ability to read people and situations allowed them to secure food, shelter, and work while avoiding exploitation or conflict. Traveling in groups provided mutual support, enabling specialization of skills and pooling of knowledge. Small communities of hobos shared tips, warned of danger, and assisted one another in practical and emotional ways. These networks were informal yet highly effective, demonstrating that cooperation and social acumen were as important to survival as physical endurance. Hobos also relied on symbols and codes to communicate. Markings on fences, posts, and sidewalks conveyed information about safe places to sleep, sources of food, or areas to avoid. These symbols created a hidden map across towns and regions, connecting travelers and transmitting crucial survival knowledge. Understanding these codes was essential, particularly for newcomers, as they provided guidance in unfamiliar environments and allowed hobos to navigate safely while maintaining discretion. This system of communication illustrates the sophistication and organization underlying a lifestyle often dismissed as chaotic or aimless. The psychological demands of life on the road were immense. Hobos faced uncertainty, isolation, and social stigma, yet developed strategies to cope with stress, maintain morale, and cultivate resilience. Humor, storytelling, music, and camaraderie were vital tools, offering both entertainment and emotional relief. Some hobos kept journals, documenting experiences, lessons, and observations that could inform future decisions or guide others. These practices reinforced mental stability, supported emotional health, and contributed to the transmission of knowledge across the hobo network. Emotional resilience was essential, as even minor setbacks, lost work, missed trains, illness, or theft could escalate into serious threats to survival. Mobility itself required ingenuity. Trains were the primary means of travel, but boarding them demanded precision, timing, and courage. Missteps could result in serious injury or death, and rail yards were often patrolled by law enforcement, known as bull handlers, who actively sought to eject trespassers. Hobos developed